When I was a kid, I stayed the night at a friend's house. I'd been there many times before, but I had never stayed the night there. His mom was a heavy smoker and his dad drank a lot of beer. Besides that, they were the perfect family. So my buddies and I stayed up late eating junk food, drinking soda, and playing N64. Around 2 a.m., we all decided to go to sleep. I woke up to the sound of a crash, like someone had knocked over the good china. I tried to wake up my friends, but they wouldn't move. So I crept up the stairs alone in the dark. When I got to the top step, I saw something had tipped over onto the dining room table. As I got closer, I could barely make out two figures. One was my friend's dad, his head trapped between what had fallen and the table. The other was just a shadow. His head twisted in my direction and screeched. I just stood there, terrified. The walls began to tremble almost to the sound of its scream. Finally, I screamed, "Go away." I felt something shove me backwards and I flew through walls and the ground until I hit the floor of the basement. I didn't know what happened. I figured it was a bad dream and fell asleep again. When I awoke the next morning, I was really itchy. It was also really hot. It was the summer, so it wasn't unusual, but I felt like I wasn't around my friends. I got out of my sleeping bag and looked around. Nothing looked the same. I yelled for my friends and the adults, but got no response. I walked around crying for what felt like hours, until I started to hear voices underneath me. I heard them calling my name. I couldn't tell who it was at the time, so I was silent. After a few minutes, I heard my mom. She was praying for me to come home. I heard her crying, and I called out to her. She stopped so abruptly, I almost didn't notice until she started screaming for my dad. After a few minutes of me crying and her consoling me, they found me in the attic. From what I could gather, I had apparently disappeared from my friend's house in the middle of the night 4 days prior. They thought I had been kidnapped as my friends' families checked out. Police had been looking for me, family, friends, almost the whole town, all the while I was in the attic. So everyone understands there was not an entryway to the attic in the house. If you wanted to get in there, you had to go through a window on the side of the house. You would need a 20-foot ladder plus power tools. But I was around 10. The only other way was to break through the ceiling inside the house. I was taken to the hospital, interviewed by police and psychiatrists, and they all couldn't explain what happened. I had 5 long scratches down my back, all parallel and the same length and width, marks along my arms and legs, and the white of one of my eyes was red for a month. My eyes are normally blue, but one was red and blue. I didn't show signs of torture or psychological distress. It was like I teleported there. I was extremely hungry and obviously confused, but nobody knows what happened or how. It's been many years now, and to this day, nobody has any clue what happened. This happened back in October of 2013, during my senior year of high school. My sister, who could really be called a medium, and I had been browsing the web for urban legends when we stumbled upon an article about a game known as the Game of 100 Candles. In short, this game was a sort of ritual very similar to how Bloody Mary is supposed to work. The people playing this game light a lot of candles, tell a ghost story, and then blow out one of the candles. By the end of the game, you should have conjured 100 separate spirits. Like every ritual game, it warns you to play at your own risk, but we thought, no big deal, none of these things are real. We found a night when our mom wouldn't be home until after 2 a.m. and planned our game. My sister, her best friend Liz, another friend Max, and I prepared for the night. We waited until our mom left and for the sun to begin to set. Then we set up our kitchen. We arranged 100 tea candles on the counter and found a box of matches. As the sun sank lower, we shut off the lights in our house, opened a glass door to let out the smoke from the candles, and turned off our cell phones. Around 7:30, once it was perfectly dark, we started the game by lighting the candles. At first, we just told lighthearted stories, like, "I saw a ghost, and he went boo." As we finished the first 10 candles, there was a palpable change in the atmosphere. The air felt static, and the hair on my neck and arms stood up. My sister, being a medium, began to squirm in her chair as we started the next set of candles from 11 to 20. The house became painfully quiet, and the stories grew darker, from silly folklore to real-time accounts of strange things we had seen. As the candles were blown out, we began hearing creaking and cracking around us. Though we lived in an older house, it had never groaned or cracked this loudly before. As we finished the next set of 10, everyone playing was visibly uncomfortable. The laughter had stopped, and a more somber tone had taken over. We ignored the strange sounds and continued to play. As the time passed and it grew closer to 8:45, the game took a sour turn. The cracks and creaks became louder and more frequent. When the 25th candle was blown out, we heard the distinct sound of someone pulling into the driveway, shutting a car door, and walking up the deck to enter through the glass doors. We waited, but the motion lights on the driveway never lit up, and nobody came to the door. Then we heard footsteps leading back across the deck and out of earshot. One of our friends suggested we pause to look outside and make sure our mom had not returned home early. At this point, my sister suggested using a dowsing pendulum. Our friends agreed, and we laid out the rules: clockwise for yes and counterclockwise for no, and saying goodbye. My sister asked the room, "Is someone here with us?" The pendulum began to rapidly swing in a clockwise direction. Our friend Max asked, "Is there more than one of you here?" The pendulum swung clockwise again. Max, feeling bold, took the pendulum himself and asked, "Did you come because we played the game?" The pendulum swung clockwise once more. Finally, he provoked it by saying, "If you really are there, why don't you prove it?" We promptly heard a loud thud against the wall behind us. We decided we were just freaking ourselves out, thinking someone must have been messing with us and had thrown something in the dark to make the thudding noise. But curiosity got the better of us, and Max suggested we keep playing. So we did. He told a story about seeing a specter in his dreams once, then seeing it in real life. He blew out the 26th candle, and 2 others blew out at the same time. My sister became visibly frightened. She later claimed that she saw a solid black mass moving down the hallway towards us. It felt like the house had become 10 degrees cooler after this candle was blown out. We all felt that chill. We sat in silence for a moment before Max said, "If you're really here, I need a sign." This is when things really hit the fan. We heard heavy, loud footsteps coming down the hallway and doors creaking open. The flames of the candles started to waver with no wind. Max grabbed my hand and whispered that something was breathing behind him, even though I was seated to his right and my sister and Liz were directly across from us. We couldn't see anything. Max froze up, then turned around suddenly with nothing behind him. The doors that we had left open slowly creaked shut with no wind present. Then Liz said that someone was touching his arm, then his neck, then his face. At this point, we decided to stop playing. The exact phrase was, "Screw this, I'm done. Say goodbye." So we did. We extinguished the rest of the candles, turned on the lights, and moved as a group. Although the candles were out and the game was over, there was still a heavy feeling all around. We moved to our dining room, where we had heard the thud earlier, to turn on the rest of the lights. As a group, we entered the room and turned on the lights. Halloween decorations littered the ground as if they'd been thrown from their original places. On top of our server was my mom's battery-powered witch, whose motor had burned out years ago. We never put batteries in it anymore, but it was sitting there. We started hearing a cracking noise from the corner of the room. We slowly turned around to see the witch rocking and bringing its wrinkled hands together, slowly getting faster and faster until it fell over. As its body hit the ground, we heard the loud bang of a door or cabinet slamming shut somewhere else in the house. Suddenly, Liz screamed that his face was burning. We turned around and saw a small scratch on his face, with a trickle of blood running down his cheek. That was it. We grabbed our phones and keys, ran out of the house, dropped our friends off, and didn't return home until much later. When we eventually returned, Another friend came over to stay up with us until our mom got home. We turned on cartoons, cranked up the volume, and tried to ignore the banging, footsteps, and heavy breathing that wandered through our house for the rest of the night. Since that night of playing 100 candles, we've seen quite a bit of activity in our home. I've shared this story in other places, but I sincerely believe that this was a catalyst for the activity in our home. I have since moved, but my sister remains in our home and still frequently experiences phenomena, including seeing the shadowy figure occasionally. Hindsight is 20/20, and we really should have listened to the warnings. But we were young and curious. Many years ago, I worked on an ambulance, first responding to 911 calls. One day, we were dispatched to a call about a person not acting right. When my partner and I arrived at the apartment complex, the first thing we noticed was that everyone except for the patient was standing outside, looking terrified and shaking violently. It was raining and nighttime, but I quickly approached them and asked what was going on. A 25-year-old man looked at me and said, "Yes, we were just playing a game when suddenly my girlfriend started shrieking and screaming. All the lights went out, including the candles, and then we saw her lay on her stomach on top of the board game. Her head, hands, and legs went into the air, and then suddenly she just fell to the floor, stood up, and ran into the back of the apartment." My partner and I cautiously walked up the steps to the apartment with our mag lights. The door was already cracked open, so I politely knocked and introduced myself as a 911 ambulance paramedic before walking inside. The light switch didn't work, but I could hear a creaking wooden noise in the background, sweeping back and forth. All the walls were painted dark colors like black and maroon, and it was obvious that these people liked heavy metal, skulls, and dark paintings because they were represented all over the walls. I started walking through the apartment, calling out for the patient, looking for any sign of her. As I walked deeper and deeper into the unit, it just started getting colder and colder. Finally, I saw her in a rocking chair, slowly rocking back and forth, just looking straight ahead. I introduced myself to her and asked her what was going on. There was no answer, and she just kept rocking back and forth. I got close to her, looking for any medical abnormalities. Her eyes were so dark. Either her pupils were that big or her eye color was just that dark, but all of her other vital signs were normal. Her blood sugar was normal, and she didn't appear to be having any seizure activity. I tried to get a painful stimulus out of her by squeezing her shoulder or doing a sternal rub, but she wouldn't even flinch. I couldn't find any track marks on her for drug use or anything. Throughout all of this, she just kept rocking back and forth, looking straight ahead. The rule of thumb for paramedics in this situation, when a patient is not alert to person, place, time, or event, is that she needs to go to the hospital. I told her that since she wasn't talking with me, I would be moving her to a stretcher. Suddenly, the rocking stopped. All sound everywhere just stopped. I could only hear breathing noises. I lifted her under her armpits, and my partner lifted her under her legs. As we lifted her, we noticed something really strange. The patient stayed in a seated form, completely rigid. We laid her on the stretcher and wheeled her into the ambulance. As we loaded her into the back, cracking noises like breaking tree branches filled the air. I looked over at her and noticed that she was now looking right at me with a huge, scary, crazed smile on her face. No matter where I moved, her head and eyes just tracked me with that same unwavering smile. My partner looked over at me sympathetically, knowing I would have to be in the back with her. I playfully said, "Good, now maybe you'll talk to me." We began driving to the hospital. The heat was on full blast in the back of the ambulance, but no matter how hard we pumped it, it just wouldn't heat up. She was still smiling that big, toothy smile and staring at me, not answering any of my questions. I looked down to grab my pen that had fallen on the floor. When I looked back up, out of nowhere, the highest pitched screams and shrieks filled the air. She started lunging and grabbing at me, clashing her teeth and biting in my direction, trying all she could to break loose. Luckily, the stretcher seatbelts were secured, keeping her just out of reach. The huge, crazed smile broke into a frightening look of terror and then anger. My back was against the wall of the ambulance. Luckily, we were already at the hospital, which unintentionally was a Catholic one. As the ambulance drove in, the patient stopped all she was doing, calmly looked straight ahead again, and went mute. We brought her into the ER and talked with the doctor about what had happened. Needless to say, he was pretty astonished by the story. So, a bit of backstory first. I've been best friends with this girl, Emma, since high school. I think it's been close to 15 years now. In fact, I used to spend more time at her house than my own. Her parents are great people and treated me like another daughter, especially since my own parents are pretty awful. However, Emma started dating a guy about a year and a half ago, and since they got serious, we haven't hung out much at all. She has since bought a house and moved in with him, so I spend a lot more time at their house now. It's been nearly 2 years since I've spent any significant time at her parents' home, aside from going over for holidays and such. Within the past year or so, Emma's mom got really into estate sales. She would buy antiques and either fill her house with them or try to resell them on eBay. I don't know if this is related to the experiences I've been having, but I find it hard to believe that these strange occurrences have nothing to do with all the objects belonging to dead people that they now have in the house. Anyway, Emma's parents contacted me about pet sitting for them while they went on vacation for a week. I was glad to do it because I owe them a lot, and honestly, I love their 3 dogs. I've known them since they were puppies. They had the 3 dogs shut in the tiled kitchen/dining sunroom area using a baby gate so that any accidents would be easy to clean, as there was no carpet. Plus, the oldest dog, a bulldog named Max, overheats easily and likes to sprawl out on the tiles. The bowls of dog food and water were left out for them, and I was supposed to head over there 2 or 3 times a day to spend maybe an hour with them, no big deal. The first day, I showed up to let the dogs outside and do my other duties. The gate between the kitchen and the rest of the house had been knocked down, but I didn't think twice about it. I figured the dogs probably knocked it over themselves out of boredom or something. 2 of the dogs were still in the kitchen, though the gate had fallen in a way that prevented them from easily getting out. However, Max was missing, which was a little weird because he couldn't easily get over the gate either. I figured he probably kicked it over behind him and wandered off to nap somewhere. Because of his age, he's the least likely to make a mess or cause trouble, so I wasn't too worried. But I realized I had to check the rest of the house for any accidents just to be safe. I got the other 2 dogs outside, fed the fish, refilled the food and water bowls, etc. Then, I got this weird feeling. Max is mostly blind, but he normally would have come wiggling to greet me, and all the noise I'd been making with the food would definitely have brought him over. I started calling for Max and looking for him. I immediately heard him barking, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I looked in all of his favorite spots, but there was nothing. At this point, I was in full panic mode because I could hear him but couldn't see him. Finally, out of desperation, I started throwing open doors upstairs and found him, scared out of his wits, shut in the guest bedroom. This made me feel really uneasy. Emma's parents had been renovating the upstairs, so the carpets were torn up and all the furniture was moved into storage. They had shut all the doors before leaving to keep the cats out, as all the tools and stuff lying around could have hurt them. So, how did Max get one of the doors open and then get shut inside? I was willing to write off the gate coming down as accidental, but finding Max shut inside a bedroom that I knew had been closed off made me feel really scared. I called Emma and told her what had happened, mostly to keep myself occupied while still at the house. She told me her parents had actually bought a really nice dog gate before they left but had forgotten to unpack it. She said I could open it and set it up if I thought it would help. I found the giant box by the front door, unpacked it, and got to work. It took the better part of an hour to set up, but it was a really good quality pressure-locked gate made of metal. It was about 4 feet tall and required 2 hands to open. There was no way a dog could knock this down accidentally. You needed to hold a button down with one hand to slide the lock off with the other hand. Content with a job well done. I left that night and went home to my own dogs. The next morning, I came back to find no issues, the gate had worked. But when I headed there after work that night, my heart dropped to my stomach. Somehow, the gate had been opened and knocked down, as if the dogs had done it. The rest of the gate was still in place between the door frame. I refused to believe the dogs had somehow opened it. Max was missing again, and once more, I found him shut in the same room upstairs. By day 3, I went back expecting more of the same, practically prepared for it. But it got so much worse. The kitchen, dining room, sunroom, and living room are all arranged in a sort of circle. From the living room, you head into the kitchen, from the kitchen to the dining room or sunroom, and from there, you can head through a door into the living room. However, the door between the living room and the sunroom is always locked. Not just closed, but actually locked. To keep anyone from getting any funny ideas, they had a chair directly in front of the door, blocking it from opening. The reason they did this is that if the door were opened, it would hit their expensive sound equipment for the TV. This door is not used regularly and hasn't been used since I met Emma. In fact, they had recently put a treadmill in the sunroom that totally blocks the door from being used. Anyway, I walked into the house that night and was greeted by the dogs. Okay, I guess the gate was opened again. Awesome. But this time, not only was the gate opened, so was the door to the living room. The armchair blocking the door had been pushed out of the way, and the door itself was unlocked. The key was usually left in the lock, and the door was just flung wide open. You know, while I do believe in the paranormal, I am naturally a pretty massive skeptic. I don't really believe any of the stories I read online or see on TV. But at this point, I was terrified of Emma's parents' house. I know it hadn't meant anything really bad, but I just didn't want to be alone when that weird stuff was going on there. Even if the door was somehow just accidentally unlocked. Unlikely, but since I didn't personally check, who knows? I can't think of a rational explanation for how that chair got moved. I also don't have an explanation for Max being shut in that room, especially the second time it happened when I know I personally double-checked the door and made sure it was firmly shut. I love and respect the family a lot, but I don't know how to tell them that I can't pet sit for them anymore. I just don't want to be in that house alone. Anyway, I finished that pet sitting job many days ago. I went back a handful of times with either my sister or Emma, never alone. When I went to check on the dogs with someone else, nothing weird happened. But I am currently in talks with them about setting up a camera. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel to be updated in my latest uploads. Thank you for watching.